TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Has the TV industry moved on since Dorothy Byrne's famous McTaggart lecture in 2019? What's Dorothy's take on woke culture? And who or what is she telling to get in the bin? It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. On this week's show, I'm joined by Dorothy Byrne, former head of news, current affairs and editor-at-large at Channel 4, and recently appointed president of the all-women's Murray Edwards College in Cambridge. Hi, Dorothy. Welcome to TellyCast.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Great to have you on, and lots I want to chat about. You've had a long and distinguished career of over 40 years in TV, and your last role was editor-at-large at Channel 4. You're obviously very well known across the UK TV industry in particular, not least because of obviously your role, but also your rather famous McTaggart lecture at Edinburgh TV Festival back in 2019. A lot of water's gone under the bridge since then, and we've obviously had the small matter of a global pandemic. But I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some of the key themes that you raised in your speech back then and get your thoughts on whether you thought the industry's moved forward in the past couple of years.
Yes, I think that things have moved forward in the last 2 years. That drive for change has actually come from people within the industry. And I think two specific things have brought change. One is the Black Lives Matter movement, and one is the Me Too movement. And I think both of those movements have helped to empower people working within the industry to say that what has been going on before is just not good enough. Yeah. I think it has helped empower women to band together and start revealing the names of some of the notorious men. And I think with the Black Lives Matter movement, I've noticed that people from different organizations are getting together in groups and they're speaking out about how they feel that their voices and perspectives have not been heard and how they have often not been made to feel that newsrooms are really welcoming and inclusive to them. And I certainly feel that I have learned a lot, particularly from the campaigning by people of colour in the industry in the last couple of years.
It's funny, isn't it, how just something like a pandemic and obviously what happened with Derek Chauvin and the terrible arrest and attack in the US that really sparked this Black Lives Matter movement. And it's amazing how things at different times and things that are not necessarily within our local industry have gained momentum through the pandemic and affected things.
Quite a number of young Black journalists have now spoken out and said that they didn't feel comfortable with the way people spoke in their newsrooms about what happened to George Floyd and about the Black Lives Matter campaigning here in Britain. They felt there was a sort of us and them feeling about some of the discussion in the newsroom. So in many ways, this has been very good in making everybody rethink the extent to which young Black journalists are really made to feel welcome or not in newsrooms. There's been a big issue for a long time about young Black people coming into the industry and getting jobs, sometimes on schemes or training schemes, but then leaving really relatively quickly. And nobody has quite understood what was going on. I'm still connected to the Ethical Journalism Network, which is a small charity, which is what it says, a network of journalists helping and supporting each other. And we have received money from the Joseph Rowntree Trust in the UK to really look at and talk to lots of people in newsrooms to find out what is going wrong, why people don't feel welcome and included, because we know it's very important for coverage to reflect society properly, that the makeup of the newsroom reflects society properly. And this problem of people from diverse backgrounds coming into newsrooms and leaving often within 2 to 5 years because they just don't feel comfortable there, is what they say, and trying to find out how we can change television to accommodate people of colour, I think is really, really important.
I look forward to hearing the results of that study. That's something, a piece of work that obviously is very valuable. Turning to one of the key points that you made in your McTaggart in 2019 was the behaviour of men, or some men, in the TV industry. And since your speech, there's been a couple of high-profile sexual assault claims against notable talent and producers as well. Do you think UK TV will ever really have its Me Too moment? Because it doesn't seem to have had the same sort of moment that Hollywood had a few years ago. Do you think that'll ever happen in the UK? Do you think there'll be a real push for these revealing of names of people that have committed sexual assaults within the TV industry?
It's very interesting to me that I have approached a number of women who had told me or others about assaults they suffered in the TV industry. And I've said to them, do you want to speak out about this person? And in some cases, I've known that there were a number of other people complaining about the same person. But women have been very reluctant to do so still. And a number have said to me, well, if I speak out, then I will be identified and only thought of as the victim of that person. Now, I don't feel that that is the case. I don't feel that it would damage them, but I have to respect their reticence. And I think it's really vital that we encourage women to be able to speak out, because that's the only way we're going to protect other women in future. I do understand their reticence, but I think there are some leading men who must be shaking in their shoes someday, thinking one day all these women are going to get together and speak out about me. And I think it would be good if they did, because it would put off men who are maybe embarking on their career and who might think that they can get away with behaviour like that. I talked about untoward things which happened to me, and I can only say I don't feel it damaged my reputation at all. I mean, frankly, anybody who would think worse of a woman because she said that she had been sexually harassed and assaulted isn't a person who should work in our industry anyway. I have to respect that women are still nervous. People still feel I don't want to be thought of as a troublemaker, because so many people are freelance workers that I think they worry that, oh, people might think they're a troublemaker and they might not get another job.
Well, what can we do then, do you think, to try and address that situation? Because it's clearly not right now. Even, we've made, a number of advancements, as you mentioned earlier on, in various areas. But the fact that right now women still feel that they don't want to speak out for fear of losing work or being castigated as a troublemaker or getting a reputation. I mean, what can we do to address that?
I think all broadcasters must be very overt about their zero tolerance policies. I mean, nowadays, I would say, of course, all broadcasters have the correct policies in place, that this sort of behaviour is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, I said during my McTaggart that on my first day in TV, one of my female bosses said to me, "You will go out with a director to begin to learn the rudiments of directing. He will sexually assault you, but don't take it personally because he sexually assaults everyone." And he did sexually assault me. And I felt, well, who can I make a complaint to? Because she told me just to expect this to happen. So I think we need to give a very clear signal. If anything like that happens, you make a complaint. A lot of these things that happen are actually criminal offences. And I think it would be good to see 2 or 3 men in the dock, because that would put other people off. I think not only should the broadcasters talk about their policies, they should encourage all the independents to have policies of their own, and there should be discussion of the policies. They shouldn't just be policies that sit in a cupboard. From time to time, it's good to sit down and say, let's just all talk about how we should work together, what our expectations of each other should be, and to make clear if people don't behave properly, you should step forward and complain about them, and that person who has harassed or assaulted should at the least be made to leave the organisation, but potentially they should be reported to the police.
Well, hopefully, moving forward, that not least as a result of your McTaggart, but also the changes that we've seen over the past couple of years in the industry. Hopefully, we are moving towards that place where women can feel more confident. I mean, it's obviously we're not there yet, and it's probably going to take a few more years, but hopefully we can get to a place where there is no second thoughts about reporting this sort of behavior when it happens, right? That's when zero tolerance really comes in, right? When it's the individual who's applying zero tolerance as well as an organisation.
Well, where women feel absolutely confident that their voice will be heard and there will be no prejudice against them.
Yeah.
That's where we want to be. And where men know that if they behave badly, that's the end of their career.
Yeah.
Because that's how it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to your speech again, you remarked about the lack of older women working in TV due to a variety of issues, including the menopause and life stage issues in family life, having a big impact of driving experienced female executives from the industry. At the time, you said major broadcasters and larger companies needed to really take the lead in offering flexible and reduced working hours and conditions to older women, so all their vast experience is not lost to the industry. We've seen Channel 4 making a policy change in 2020. My guess is as a result of your McTaggart. But have you seen much change elsewhere in the industry? Do you think anybody's taking that seriously?
I think on the issue of encouraging older women to keep working in our industry. We're still at pretty early stages, to be honest. Channel 4 has adopted this terrific menopause policy, and we invited indies in to discuss the issue as well, to show them how relatively simple it is to have an effective menopause policy. I think every organisation should have a menopause policy. And one of the things about having a menopause policy is it also signals to older women, you're wanted. So it's not just about the policy itself, it's about the message. And of course, one reason it's important to have older women working in the industry is that they can then reflect the issues that affect this enormous percentage of the population in the television and the films that they make. One of my last commissions at Channel 4 internally, because I'm still making some programs for Channel 4, was the film about the menopause that Davina McCall presented.
Right,
and
yeah.
That film rated well and got massive publicity. So for Channel 4, it was tick, tick, tick all round. But of course, the reason I commissioned that program was that I was really interested in all those issues myself. So to reflect the audience and therefore to retain and build the audience, you need to have people working within your organizations who come from all age groups, all ethnic groups, all genders. And that way you will actually, in my view, be more commercially successful. I think also we have learned in this pandemic that people can work effectively in very different and flexible ways. And this whole obsession one has lived with for decades in TV with presenteeism, that is, you have to be in the office day and night to prove that you're a really keen and effective worker. I think we have all learned that was never necessary. And everybody needs to find new ways of working and flexible ways of working. As we're speaking now, you've just had to drop your children off at school. That huge pressure that parents often feel in the morning to get their children to school so they can then be at work on time and not be badly thought of because they're late is almost certainly unnecessary. And for a lot of people, if you just said, it's fine if you start work 15 or 30 minutes later and catch up with that time during the day, that would make the most enormous difference to them. So we need it for older women, we need it for parents, but really we need it for everybody. We need to just be much kinder to the people who work in the industry.
It's something that we've covered on TellyCast on earlier episodes about, the positives that we might see in working practices coming as a result of the pandemic. And I do think that we've come so far in terms of people working from home, working out that business can still flourish remotely because we've got all the technology. The technology was there before, but it was just this, I don't know, as you say, you used the term presenteeism.
Always having to be in the office, we've learned we don't need that.
Yeah.
We've also learned that we can meet in other places really creatively. So nearer the end of, we're not at the end of the pandemic, but when things let up a bit, I had several meetings in my garden with people, and they were incredibly creative. I've had quite a number of meetings during this pandemic walking about the park, and again, really creative. I felt much more creative than I would have done if we were just sitting in the office. I mean, we don't want to do all our lives on Zoom, but there's a role for it. For myself now, I'm president here at Murray Edwards College. I'm sitting talking to you from my very pleasant office in Cambridge, looking out over my lovely gardens. Well, later, I'm going to be having a Zoom meeting about a big two-part series that we're making for Channel 4 Stars and others about Ghislaine Maxwell. And I'll be able to have that on Zoom here as a very, very effective business-like meeting, rather than having to rush to an office in London. But I will still need to have some in-person meetings, because you just get quite a different creative spark. So I find the business-like meetings are fine, but I find a big brainstorm really hard to have. But viewings on Zoom and using other methods, I found a lot of those absolutely fine.
The logistical aspects of production and just, as you say, the business discussions as opposed to the creative, that's interesting. I think we'll all look back actually at those times when we were chained to our desk and people did feel slaves to getting in at whatever the official time was, and also in some organisations it was a case of, if you left at 5 o'clock or 5:30, you were seen as somebody who wasn't committed. People working till late at night to kind of show their boss, wait till their boss had gone home, and then, I can go home now, which is ridiculous, isn't it? Now, and I think that's one of the positive things that I think all can look and, as you said, work in a kinder way, more inclusive way. And also coming back to the original point is that, hopefully this technology now enables the vast experience of some of the more senior women in the industry for us to retain that knowledge and that expertise. I mean, speaking personally, the female bosses I've had in my career have always been the best. To think that the technology we're using now is going to retain a lot of those skills in the industry for years to come is a great thing.
It will be of great help to women. One of the things I talked about is that there's a period in women's lives when they're going through the menopause, and about a quarter of women suffer really bad problems in the menopause. And this often coincides with their parents not being very well, who may well be living in a different place. I mean, I was living in London and my mother was living in Halifax. It was a nightmare. And your children are undergoing the ghastly state exams we have in this country. And quite often, say with children and exams, just if you're in the house with them, it just makes them feel better. They don't want you sitting there studying with them, but it's such a pressured time for young people. Being able to have one of their parents working at home can just really make a difference. And when I used to have to go and visit my mother, it wasn't that I needed to be with my mother all day. I needed to visit her maybe twice a day. So I could easily have visited her and then had lots of Zoom meetings and then visited her again. So I would have been able to fit everything in much more easily. And I think we've learned that can be done and people can work effectively. And it's greener. One of the last things I did for Channel 4 was write their environmental policy. And of course, what could be more environmental than everybody not getting on the roads and the tubes and everything in the morning and pounding into offices. So I think there are environmental advantages, although we have also learned that a bit about how streaming and things like that also uses up energy, and we never thought about that properly before.
That's a whole issue on its own that we've covered on the show. But you're absolutely right. I think that's another benefit of the technology that's come through as a result of the pandemic, or its adoption has been wider since the pandemic. Another thing that we've seen the rise of is so-called woke culture in the 2 years since your McTaggart. The debates around woke culture. How do you think they will affect program making and reporting in the TV industry going forward?
The term woke is used by the right-wing press in a very negative way, and you have to separate out the different issues that they are trying to mix up together, because for some on the right, the so-called culture wars are forms of debate which they believe they can use to their advantage. So when people use the disparaging term woke, they are often referring to what are in fact very good things about being more inclusive. So I'm sitting here in a women's college, for example, but we say here at Murray Edwards that if you identify as a woman, you can apply to come and be part of our community. And somebody asked me, oh, well, how many trans women do you have? And I said, well, I don't know, because if you identify as a woman, as far as I'm concerned, you can come here. I haven't counted people separately. And that sort of inclusivity is really good. Not having comedians on television make awful racist and misogynist jokes, that's really good. What, of course, isn't good is any attempt to reduce proper debate and discussion. And I think that key to why British television is so good, and the sort of thing that your Netflixes are not there to do, is to talk about some of the very difficult issues within our own society. And when we do that, we shouldn't shy away from difficult issues. So that side of things, I think we should all in the media industry stand up very strongly about. No subjects should be off limit. You should be able to have good debates about really, really controversial issues. But I think the term woke itself actually is misleading and causes, it's being used by people to further their own particular views and prejudice. I don't find it a useful term.
In your original McTaggart, you talked about TV industry being unrepresentative of society. I noticed a recent survey for this year's festival found that 62% of the UK viewing audience believes political correctness has gone too far, compared with only 19% of people working within the TV industry. So there's obviously a huge disparity between the audience and those that work within the industry. How does the TV industry approach that huge disparity?
Well, first of all, I would say they are probably talking about two different things, because one woman's political correctness is another woman's tolerance. So if you read constantly in your right-wing newspaper, political correctness has gone mad, that is a message that you are likely, if you read British newspapers, to read almost every day. You'll go, oh, yeah, right, I keep reading about this, political correctness has gone mad. But then if I say to you, well, what element of political correctness is it that you don't like? You get a different sort of answer, because actually British people are pretty tolerant. Look how the British people totally transformed their views about gay marriage. You know, gay marriage 15 years ago was seen as, by many people, as some sort of out there idea, some sort of thing that was never, ever going to happen. Now it's massively accepted and was brought in by a Conservative government. So I think that probably people in TV, because they are dealing with these issues all the time, are thinking, well, actually, political correctness is just about tolerance and equality of opportunity. And I think that the two groups are not necessarily referring to the same thing. And I do sometimes question people when they say political correctness is too much. Go on, give me examples. And they can hardly think of any. Or they'll mention something and I'll say, well, I also agree that that's ridiculous. You know, so I think it's some of it is about the term, what people mean by the term, and the fact that they just keep hearing this all the time. I mean, there are groups who've got left behind, and TV's left them behind. And we know white working class boys are doing worse in the education system than anybody else. And I think white working class people in Britain can rightly feel that their concerns are not properly dealt with in TV. And that is a big issue. And that's partly because there are insufficient white working class people, especially from the north of England, working in the television industry. That we had a big drive to get more women into the industry and a big drive to get more people from ethnic minorities into the industry. And with both groups, they're ensuring that people remain in the industry and get promoted to the highest level. But we've not had a sufficient drive about social mobility, and the industry must work much harder to bring in white working class people to the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully Channel 4's relocation, and it needs to be much more diverse, you know, and that's where the word diverse, what it means. It's not just about any particular group. It's actually about, as you say, social mobility and class mobility as well.
And often when people say political correctness has gone too far, they actually mean something else. They mean that, because generally I find it's white people who say political correctness has gone too far. And often what people really mean is they feel, I can see there's a drive to bring other groups in to the highest echelons of power and to get them onto TV. But I don't feel I can see my group be getting that push behind them getting on. And I think as an industry, the media industry must really do much more to signal to the population of the UK that we want people from all parts of the UK, and we definitely want white people from disadvantaged groups and working class people working in our industry at the highest levels. It's always entertained me that so many people have assumed that because I was born in Paisley and I don't have a posh accent, I must be working class. I'm not working class at all. I mean, my grandmother went to university. She was one of the first female graduates at Aberdeen University that were ever allowed to graduate. The idea that I am, you couldn't be more middle class than I am, but lots of people in TV have assumed I was working class because they just don't know enough people like themselves.
I have had that in the past where, you speak to somebody and they just an immediate thing they do is impersonate your accent. Now, I haven't got a particularly strong Northern accent anymore. And it's almost a novelty for them, or it certainly was. It's not so much anymore, but...
Yeah, this thing of impersonating your accent being acceptable is terrible. I have suffered throughout my career with people impersonating my accent in the office and putting on some dreadful fake Scottish accent. I mean, they would not do that to another ethnic minority, but it's telling you something really serious about them, that they think being Scottish is sort of strange, different, and quaint. Well, there are more than 5 million of us, so we're not strange, different, and quaint. We're a great big group of people.
Yeah. You talked about making TV shows about the big issues and the lack of those because people were perhaps in the TV industry too ready to agree with their bosses. So the question is, in order to disagree with bosses constructively and tell the big important stories, how do you do that? How do you disagree with your boss and get those important stories told on TV?
Well, first of all, I think this problem of people agreeing with their bosses has got much worse than since I entered television. When I entered TV, everybody I worked with had a staff job, and that puts you in a much stronger position to disagree with your boss. Now there are so many freelance people, and this tendency they have to agree with the commissioning editor, that just does not do any good for making good television programs at all. I mean, I would say the bosses have to change. From the top, they must be told, you should welcome disagreement, you should welcome debate, because that way you get the better program. Anybody listening to this will recognize what I say. Somebody comes up with an idea, maybe the boss, often that's the worst when this happens, and nobody in the room says, this is a really terrible idea. And then everybody just agrees with it. And then it goes out, nobody watches it, it's panned everywhere. And people say, how was that program ever made? Well, again and again, those programs were made because nobody dared to disagree. And people have got to see the business case for encouraging disagreement.
Yeah.
You get a better product if people say, do you know what, that idea just won't work. It's not any good. I think we've got into a real culture of agreement across the industry. The BBC was always notorious for it, but I think because jobs are more insecure now, I think it's widespread. and it will hold us back. You know, the people who made those brilliant programs in the early days of Channel 4 were people who really disagreed with the ideas that were just widely accepted in society at that time. You know, you need mavericks, you need the people who disagree.
There seem to be very few mavericks around in the TV industry. So what we should probably do, as you say, is for the bosses to actually accept being challenged. And it should be a role of a boss, of a commissioner, commissioning editor, to be challenged, right? That should be part of the role. There's an old adage where you always employ somebody better than you. If you're looking for somebody for a role, it's always about employing somebody who's actually going to be better than you, who's going to challenge you because they make you look good. That's the old sort of boss adage. But it's actually bosses should be encouraging people to challenge them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really major issue in our industry, and it's a block on creativity and change.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to talk about politics for a second in terms of political TV. And you made the point about politicians being held to account and the worrying trend of major party figures avoiding in-depth interviews, presumably to avoid the associated risk and lean more into their own threat-free social media channels that they own and operate. I don't see any change in that over the past 2 years. Is the era of the set-piece, long-form political interview gone, or is this current trend just that? It's going to be replaced by a better and braver political approach in the future by maybe better equipped politicians?
Well, this is a very depressing subject, isn't it? Because I think since I talked out at the McTaggart, if anything, it's worse. And I think in the pandemic, what we have seen is these set-piece press conferences at this really key time in our country's life, in which a politician stood there and took random questions about complex scientific and medical issues, often from people who were the heavy-hitting political editor rather than the science editor, and really never got properly grilled and held to account. I was, at the beginning of the pandemic, by chance, visiting fellow at the Reuters Institute in Oxford. And for my research there, I interviewed about 30 political science and medical correspondents, as well as some scientists and statisticians, about COVID coverage. And they all thought it was pretty poor. The science correspondents complained that when they wanted to go to the press conferences and ask a series of in-depth questions, they were told, "You're not going, the political editor is going." And then at those press conferences, individual journalists asked their own questions and weren't allowed follow-ups. So I think we got very poor standards of understanding out of that. And I actually think that some of the best critical journalism and the most important journalism during COVID was done by newspapers, not television. And interestingly, a lot of the best stuff was done by right-wing newspapers. I think, I'm not just saying it because I worked at Channel 4, I think Victoria MacDonald at Channel 4 did a great job about exposing what was really happening in hospitals and care homes. Mm. I was disappointed not to see really major investigation coming out of the BBC, which after all is a great big expensive machine we all pay for. And the good journalism that we saw terrific journalism from the Sunday Times, which broke the story that old people were being turned away from hospitals to die and being refused treatment if they were in hospital with COVID. The Daily Mail and the Telegraph did fantastic stuff about what was really going on with PPE, really good stuff about the contracts. But we didn't see this on television enough. And we didn't see real in-depth interviews with the people who were controlling what was happening in dealing with COVID. On Radio 4, again and again, relative lightweights were being put on by the government for interviews. One thing one has to say about Matt Hancock is he was one of the few key people who did regularly put himself up for interview on the Today programme in the morning, but we didn't see other heavy hitters doing it. And often the interviewees the government was putting up were not the people actually running what the government was doing with COVID. And I think our government and our institutions in this pandemic have let the country down. Tens of thousands of people died unnecessarily, and they weren't properly held to account because they wouldn't put themselves up to be held to account. And television didn't do enough in the way of big in-depth investigation.
I guess one of the best known journalists for holding politicians to account, and the one that they often run miles from, particularly around general elections, is Andrew Neil. And he's just announced he's stepping down from his role as chairman and lead presenter at GB News after just 1 year. What do you make of that?
Well, I think Andrew Neil was a great loss to terrestrial television. He's a fellow Paisley buddy, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I think he is an utterly brilliant interviewer. And it was an enormous shame that the BBC got rid of him, or didn't, whatever it was happened. That was really an error to lose such an important interviewer. He's his own man. And so I'm not surprised it didn't work out well on GB News. But of course, Andrew Neil ended up that he often couldn't get the key interviewees to come on his programme because they were scared of him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So he's a victim of his own success to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
You're now the newly installed president of the all-women's Murray Edwards College in Cambridge. We talked a little bit about that earlier on. Tell us about your role. And I know you're also still producing TV. So first of all, tell us about your role at the college and how you're going to use your skills learnt in a career in TV within education. And then tell us a little bit about what you're doing in TV still.
I find it very entertaining that I'm a president. I have promised not to invade any countries or do anything appalling. The head of a college at Cambridge is a leader. They're more like the chair rather than the CEO. And there are brilliant people who organise this college. I mean, they're really outstanding. And my role is more that of inspiration and those sorts of leadership qualities. I'm here because I've always taken a huge interest in education and been involved in it. And I really believe in widening participation in education. I'm very keen to take part in the campaign that run here to get more people from diverse groups into Cambridge. Cambridge has, made huge strides. More than 70% of students now come from state schools. when it used to be that about half the people here were from private schools. There's a way to go there. I mean, in this college, around 24% of the young people come from ethnic minorities, the UK students. At the university as a whole, it's something like 27% of people come from less advantaged backgrounds. But the key thing I want to do is to really work with all the people here to make the population at this university as representative of the UK population as possible. And at the same time, I'm very lucky. I'm also involved in films. I was one of the executive producers of a film going out this week on Channel 4 on the poisoning of Navalny. I'm making one of the executive producers of a big 2-part series about Ghislaine Maxwell, and I've got several other programs commissioned, and I will never want to not work in TV. What's great about television is you can just have a great idea, and if you can persuade somebody to buy it, you get to put it on TV.
And are those commissions all with Channel 4 or are they with a variety of networks?
Several with Channel 4, but one is with ITV, and the Ghislaine Maxwell we've sold to Stars. So I will work with a variety of people.
Right. We'll put a link in the episode description to those shows so everyone can go and have a look. And perhaps unsurprisingly, you've made the headlines already, Cambridge, saying that Cambridge University should take 93% of its students from state schools, whilst those studying at Eton should perhaps travel to the north and go to Leeds and Manchester and meet more diverse people.
Yes, I think it would have done Boris Johnson and David Cameron a lot of good to go to Sheffield University, one of the universities I attended myself. And I do think that the assumption that some people could make in the past, that if they went to a top private school, they would have the opportunity denied to other people who were cleverer than they were to go to Oxford and Cambridge. That should be an idea that needs to be dropped. I'm surprised in many ways that people are shocked by the idea universities should be representative of the UK population. It's so absolutely obvious to me.
And now it's that time in the show where my guests get to nominate their story of the week, the TV industry news that's caught their eye in the past 7 days. What's your story of the week, Dorothy?
Well, I'm obviously really concerned about the potential privatisation of Channel 4. More and more of what one reads would indicate that the government is determined to privatise Channel 4. And I personally think it's a jewel in the British crown. It's done so much to bring diverse voices into debate in Britain, and it's created a whole incredibly successful industry, that is the independent television industry. And I think the attack on it is really for political reasons and doesn't make economic sense. And if it is to happen, I hate to think of it, but it is to happen, we must all in the TV industry campaign for the values of Channel 4 to be protected.
You can't see that happening, though, can you? I mean, just the fact that the Channel 4 is really sort of steeped in British culture and, a lot of positive aspects of British culture as well that it showcases. It doesn't make sense. I mean, from a financial perspective, we've seen PACT recently publish the impact that it thought privatisation would have. Is it revenge? Is it just political point scoring that the Conservative government is playing here? Because you can't make the case for it financially, surely, or I haven't heard it anyway.
I don't think there is a strong financial case, but I also don't think it's revenge. What I feel it's more likely to be is that the right were calling on the government to take really savage action against the BBC, and they haven't done that. So the right wants to see something radical done. So the alternative to savaging the BBC is privatising Channel 4. And I have never walked down the street and heard anybody say what I think should really be done is the privatisation of Channel 4. I don't think there's public demand for it. I'm also concerned as a news person that it means that we've got one fewer public service broadcaster that is not devoted to being a commercial broadcaster. ITV, Sky, Channel 5, these newses are excellent, but ultimately those are organisations that have to take into account how much money they are going to make. The great thing about Channel 4 and the BBC is that they are not driven by that imperative to turn a profit. So that leaves just the BBC, which is not driven by financial imperative to make a profit. And we don't want the BBC to just become the equivalent of the only public service, non-commercial broadcaster. The diversity of voice has been what has been so good and what has made our news in this country so good. Channel 4 has been really, really good competition to the BBC and has provided a strong alternative agenda to the agendas that other news services supply. So whatever happens, news and current affairs and that independent voice which Channel 4 News and Current Affairs have must be preserved.
And now it's that time in the show for Dorothy to nominate her hero of the week and who or what she's telling to get in the bin. Dorothy, who's your hero of the week?
My hero of the week is everybody's hero of the week. It's Emma Raducanu. She is brilliant and charming and was so generous to the opponent who lost.
Yeah.
But also, I so admire her for the way that she came back from the awful thing that happened to her at Wimbledon. And as a woman who leads a women's college at Cambridge, Mary Edwards, you know, what an inspiration she is to the young women here, that what you should do is use the adversity that you have experienced in your life to help you to achieve great things rather than allow that adversity to determine your future.
Yeah. A lesson for us all from an 18-year-old in New York on September 11th, which was extraordinary. And obviously Channel 4, the figures have just come out that Channel 4, I think it was 9 million tuned in on Channel 4 when they did the rights deal with Amazon Prime to show the show live on Saturday night.
Fantastic. That was fantastic that Channel 4 showed it, and it showed just how important Channel 4 is. And hey, politicians, when you're thinking, should you privatise Channel 4, remember moments like that.
And the great thing, again, you know, I love a story that has loads of positives. The money that Channel 4 paid to Amazon Prime is being reinvested into women's tennis in the UK as well. So hopefully there'll be a whole squad of Emma Raducanu's coming through in the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, I think that is brilliant. But I also think that the fact that a British terrestrial broadcaster worked with an organisation like Amazon Prime shows that it's not about streaming companies and terrestrials being enemies. There's room for everybody.
And who or what are you telling to get in the bin, Dorothy?
Definitely the Taliban should get in the bin. This has been such a very distressing time for women all over the world, and particularly I would mention women journalists all over the world. We have seen this terrible attack on female television journalists in Afghanistan, a brilliant group of women, so admirable, and driven off the screens. And I know that we will all, as other women journalists, not forget them and campaign to help them.
Yeah, it's very distressing. And I just hope we've got a bin big enough for all of the Taliban to get in there.
I would just, other people will lend you their bins to help out.
Exactly. Everybody's putting the bins out for the Taliban. Yeah. There we go. All right. Dorothy, thank you. It's been a real treat to have you on TellyCast this week. Really enjoyed having a chat with you. I'll let you go on to your new day job at the college in Cambridge now, and can't wait to see the 2 shows that you mentioned earlier on in the show as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Justin. That's very kind of you to invite me, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. As always, thanks for listening. Last week's show was the fastest downloaded yet, so thanks again for all your support. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. And a quick reminder to sign up for our free newsletter called TellyCast Plus. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories of the week you might have missed, downloadable reports and surveys, and exclusive insight and opinion. And it's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at telecast-podcast.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Until next Thursday, as always, stay safe.